I must tell you that when Phil asked me to read, I was caught off guard. I was delighted and thrilled, but I felt like a deer in the headlights. That said, the poems that I'm going to read tonight I've divided into 3 parts. The first section is about Minnesota, the second section is about Denver, and the third section is about California and the world beyond. So the first poem is about my neighborhood, and I was lucky enough to grow up at a time when children could wander all over. We were told not to take candy from strangers or to get into cars with strangers, and that was it. And so I was able to wander all over the town. And in our neighborhood, we had lots of vacant lots and lots of kids. So I had a lot of fun when I was little. This is called Mrs. Cleveland's Rose Garden for my sister. 3 doors down, Mrs. Cleveland's oval garden lay in the sun, aflame with the rose gods of saffron, carmine, and vermilion. But marching through them, as if to chasten the rainbow, and regal enough to please dour Mrs. C., whose 2-inch mind thought a wildflower a weed, a squadron of blue bachelor buttons pricked the soil with skinny stems, pricked my nose with bee desires. On the far side of her house stretched the vacant lot where, on Saturday afternoons, we played ball with all our fathers, and which, in games of hide and seek, we children crossed later in the dark toward goal, elated and alone. This next one is self-explanatory. Minnesota is the land of 10,000 lakes. And so I was surrounded by lakes and rivers when I was growing up. And on hot summer nights after my parents got home from work, we always headed for the lake or for the river. This is called Nocturne. In summer, they drove home from the lake at dusk, past the deep woods of central Minnesota, past the ponds and muskrat farms, the cattails and the cowslips, and the red-winged blackbirds in the fields. Marsh grass and hay scented the air as night drifted down over the woods. As they drove home toward sleep, and air and cricket song floated through their windows. But something besides vespers hung in the air, surrounding the black Ford, crunching the frogs and speeding towards town. Something besides clover sweetened the hour. On the back seat, toweled and chilly, Gabriel shivered languidly under terry cloth, absorbed in sounds, scents, shadows, and wind, and the memory of water licking her body. So I got to walk all over town when I was little, and then because I had relatives who lived on farms, I got to walk all over the woods. So as soon as we got out of the car, my sister and I, either alone or together, would disappear into the woods and tramp around. And so this is a poem about tramping in the woods. An American Sampler. Whether the wild asparagus grew behind Grandma's shed or along the riverbank in the wind-scratched grass, Mother knew all its secrets, for in among the oaks, twined with bittersweet and wild roses, we snapped asparagus stains into our hands. Another sight beckoned farther down the river opposite the mental institution. Here, by the shadowy waters, in scattered patches of mosquito light, we picked bundles of succulent asparagus shoots until our arms were full and heavy, and the air crackled with vegetal scent. It was forbidden here on others' property by the overgrown fern road to trespass and to plunder. And to this day, I wonder how Mother knew of this place so far downriver from her home. Her roaming must have been far and wide, unknown even to her siblings. Fussy about the wood ticks, I watched across the river for patients who sometimes wandered into its waters to drown. And our town was on the Rum River, and the Rum River is the river that ran by my grandmother's farm, and it was called the Rum River by the Indians because it was the color of rum. And then it flowed into the Mississippi, so our town was at that point where the rum flowed into the Mississippi. Naturally, in a place where there's so much water, there were a lot of deaths, and so every year in the news you would hear about them. This is a poem about water deaths. And also, in the river by my grandmother's house, there was a sandbar, and sandbars are like little islands that pop up in the river, and if they're young, they are without any foliage on them, and the sand is hard. But as time goes by, foliage begins to sprout, and today that same sandbar is so thick with foliage, I couldn't walk there very well. Water deaths. In the Rum River below Grandma's farm, a sandbar reposed like a hard brown animal on whose back we loved to play. But they say 2 people drowned on its far, steep side. A swimmer from the other bank was caught and carried under by a spring. One companion and then another went down to help. Only one returned. When I was younger, I sometimes walked to this edge of the sandbar and looked down, trying to see into the water's murky depths, letting my feet feel the muddy slide of the abyss. I remember another water death, the only son of my father's friend, a quiet boy from the university and heedless of 101s, thought he would test his kayak on whitewater he had never shot. On shore, his fiancée paced to and fro, warning him not to go. The day was fine, and for a moment she thought she heard birdsong in the trees. For all I know, in memory, she is still pacing, unwilling to leave the spot where he disappeared so long ago, like a leaf into shadow. And so this is a poem about not being able to go home. In Minnesota, the world is frozen to tintype, transmogrifying rivers and lakes to a lunar Baedeker. Our plane descends through clouds as curious as illusions and touches down beside the Mississippi, as lightly as the loon skimming water. And then the semaphore to self clanks down, a warning of Minnesota nice, the bitter cold, the stark wind, and the rural ennui where fish alone survive in dark depths. And this last one, I think I read not so long ago here. It's my grandmother had a child out of wedlock, and so her father, I think, bribed my grandfather to marry her by giving him 300 acres of prime farmland on the Rum River. And of course, it was great because there were 20, 30-foot banks, so it would never flood. Fortunately, it was a happy marriage, so far as I know, although my grandmother had a face like George Washington. But anyway, and she had 11 kids, all born on the kitchen table, so they said. Crop Circles 101. Some baker has left giant spritz cookies in the fields across the globe, embossing the wheat with designs and leaving no trace of his passing, no footprints in the dust, no excess chaff with the trail, all threshed and gleaned by his ruth. What would think a farm dog would have heard movement in the night? Surely some farm dog on some farm the world over would have heard a twig snap, a footfall in the grass, or a cry and alerted his master. Surely pixie dust did not seal up his eye with secrets. After their father's death, Uncle Rob hid amid the corn and raped his 4 half-sisters, payback for being the bastard son, failing only when the 5-year-old cried, take Essie, she's older." But Essie, ever the wiser, fled into the woods and learned always to glide without sound, as well as to travel with a pack of hounds, not to mention the switchblade stolen from the 5 and dime. So those are my Minnesota poems, and I have a few from Denver. This is the first one I ever wrote in Denver. It's called Feminine Sublime. I live on the edge of a park, cluttered with oak trees, a zoo, and a lake. In the early morning, when no one's up, I often walk there in the almond light, or at night if it's not too late. But at night, the moon plays tricks among the trees, loosening their branches out across the park. The leaves rustle. Swans swim behind a cloud of cottonwoods. Animals whistle and cry. More peaceful than any sleep a woman could have is this black world at 2 or 3 in the morning. If only she could walk there alone, as others can. And then I have a couple of poems about my boyfriend at the time. And one time we went to San Francisco, and we were taken with going into these old hotels and looking at their lobbies. So this one is called Memento Mori. We are new to this city and nightly pass among the lobbies of old hotels redolent of ghosts, astonished by elegant velvet rooms where light cascades from chandeliers. It is here we come upon ourselves like specters reflected in a large jeweled mirror and marble walls. Our faces have a lovely but haunted look. We linger shyly before the glass, looking at this couple we scarcely know. How unsettling to see these selfies grinning at us from antique glass. But how radiant we seem too as we nightly pass among the lobbies, our faces slipping by us in the glass like petals sinking into black water. See, there we are in glass, I murmur. And as you look, I say, oh, here we are again in marble, and here, and here. Our faces vanish as we pass. And then I walked all over Denver, in part because I did not have a car. My boyfriend did not have a car for a while, and so we did a lot of walking. And in this poem, we're walking in lower Denver, downtown Denver, by the train yards. Denver Nocturne. Night begins to gather over the city. We wander by a row of warehouses near the viaduct where the wind clatters down alleys. You are saying that so-and-so is lonely. We follow along to the end of the narrow street where the sun's reflection still manages a lurid furnace light. At this hour, no one seeks the alley but us. Your voice is monotonous. Now in the darkness, strung out in rows, a little farther on, we find the trains. They are old and decorated with graffiti. Some cars are open as if waiting for life. You say again that so-and-so is lonely. And this next section is about California and the world beyond. I like the poet Hart Crane. I like his poems about the sea. And he spent a lot of time on the sea, and as you know, he died in the sea. And I like selkies, which are part seal and part human, and originate in the Orkney Islands in Britain. So this is for Hart Crane, although he never wrote about selkies. It's called Legend. I wish I were a selkie, my seal skin tucked into a secret chest out of sight, safe from anyone who would steal it from me to put me in my place. At night, I could slip away among the tides and lose myself in crocus lusters, slicing the water with my lithe body and watching night clouds march across the moon. I could race with kin along the shores of the known world, greeting leviathans on their journey south to Mexico, and rejoice in their orisons pulsing around us in the firmament, and the leather slapping of wings overhead, of late pelicans returning homeward to the Channel Islands. Then at dawn, to rise again from the waves, lovelier than Venus and sea foam, and hurry home to bed, my long hair wild with spindrift, smelling of salt and seaweed, to nestle against my husband's warm back, my transformation, reminding me of the losses of womanhood no selkie seems to need. Why should we need wisdom when we have the sea? Why should we rue time and old bones, mistakes and sorrows, when at night, back in our own skin, we can swim endlessly for miles in the wind-swept waves along a paradisal coast? It will be a long time yet before these waters are too warm and cruel to soothe our silken bodies. When I worked full-time and part-time, I hated Sundays. I just could not stand them. Once Monday came around, I was okay because the week was underway and it soon would be the weekend again. But on Sundays, sometimes I had to run my errands, so there was no chance to breathe. And when I was running my errands, I would often listen to blues on the radio. So this one is called "The Sunday Blues Shack is My Prayer." I don't know why I love slicing mushrooms. I love the blades' neat halving of their creamy buttons, smoother than butter, almost as if I were slicing some vital nougat whose revelation makes life turn out all right after all, that will kick-start the earth on its axis after it seems to stall on Sundays, when a dead zone falls around me and the ambient sounds before birth and after death whisper knowingly of time just beyond my hearing, and the mammoth tusk found lately in Seattle reminds me of all the hidden pockets of earth still holding the arcane secrets of people long forgotten, as do the shadowy whereabouts of my own grave. No, a girl cannot have too many knives or colanders, or little black dresses, for that matter. And my grandfather was from the Philippines. He was from that first generation of Filipinos brought to the U.S. by the military to placate and neutralize the natives. So this poem is for him. He died at 34 of pneumonia in New York. And I mentioned a bolo. A bolo is a long, heavy machete originating in the Philippines. Bolo warrior. My husband keeps a machete under the bed. It looks old and dull, but its blade whiffles the palm leaves I cut for birdshade over the cockatiel cage when hot days seem strange and dangerous. The wind whips the banana plant skyward and I stalk it. My arm unfurls like a discus thrower, the sigh of my knife severing green sinews, pulp and stem, sap splattering my face. Knowledge tightens the arc begun generations ago when grandfather's people perfected bolo obrats on the Spaniards and later on the Americans hungry for archipelagos. I like the arc of the knife as I swing to, my arm remembering the chase in the open air, the cries of the overtaken and the contact exact. I wonder if grandfather long ago understood the lure of the Pacific on adventurers before he too, enthralled by conquerors, fled his jungle mother, keening to and fro on the beach, a forlorn woman defeated by history, the ship in 1902 carrying away forever her little son to godless Tennessee. And then this last poem is called A Haunting. I like trees, particularly very old trees, and I like olive trees for that reason. Yesterday, Arturo finally chopped down the olive tree, the one we've loved so long, the one with the thick, twisted trunk and pollarded branches, redolent of Italy and North Africa. The tree has been under siege since old Mr. Fitzgerald died, and new owners arrived to desecrate its umbel by severing one of its two main arteries. They later stripped the house, too, in subprime rage. Then Arturo moved in and transformed the house with magic fingers so that we dared to intervene on the tree's behalf, hopeful he too would love its antiquity. For a while, he did try to reshape it, its branches proffering a feathered halo around its missing arm, scar tissues for a warrior's lost limb. Its greenery lilted to us, and we saluted its resilience. But then, one morning, we awoke to the heartless grind of the buzzsaw and found its trunk tumbled about the ground like chunks of ruins in Carthage. In Tunisia, the Bedouin women among the shadowy in Tunisia, the Bedouin women bend among the shadowy olive groves, sweeping up tiny leaves for fuel, sweeping the dun row smooth and hard. The Moroccans, Paul Bowles told me, dislike trees. They fear the jinn inside them. Now, when I look out the window, barren space admonishes me. I beg forgiveness of the tree for our failure, we who love dominion. Thank you.